This is Thinker Be Eaten, and back after a little bit of a hiatus is Andy Colvin. Most of you, I don't have to say anything about it. I mean, if you've been around the show at any time between 2002 and the present, you've had to come across some of Andrew's files that we've done. And he's back to catch us up on some more happenings. And first of all, good to hear from you again, Andy. And your whistling is really good.
What?
Let me do this. Let me tell folks, he is on a cell phone somewhere in Ohio. So understand that we have some audio issues. And that's what probably is at the core of it. So go ahead, Andrew. I'm sorry.
Well, we're parked on a baseball field in Fredericksburg, Fredericktown, Ohio, which is near Mount Vernon. They're close together. North of Columbus, about a half hour, an hour. It's the heart of the old German Ohio.
Okay.
And it's very windy. And we're in a car, and we're trying to get the windows just right so we're not toasting in the sun because it's like 90 degrees. And
what is the nearest city to you guys?
What's the nearest city to us where we're at? Columbus is pretty close, but
okay.
We're north of it, sort of near Mansfield. A tornado blew through Columbus a couple days ago, right through where I was staying, actually, and we were in the basement and all that. But there was an Indian mound. There is an Indian mound about 2 or 3 blocks from where I was, so I felt pretty confident that
you'd be spared.
Wouldn't get hit with a tornado. But yeah, it totally blew down a lot of things, and we drove last week. There was another tornado that touched down in eastern Ohio near Point Pleasant. And Harriet and I were over there looking for Indrid Cold's landing spot, and we couldn't get to it from one direction because a trailer had rolled down the hill and was blocking the road. I mean, that was just some serious tornado action.
Well, interestingly, at the time that happened, I happened to be going through the channels, and I went to the Weather Channel, and I saw that they were doing pretty much breaking news and isolating on these cells that were blowing west to east. And at the time I was watching, they were wailing, of all places, dear to our hearts, Athens, Ohio, the Hocking Valley, and that's all what you guys experienced was all part of that, I'm sure.
Well, that was last week, and that's where this Indrid Cold landing spot is. It's about 20 minutes, half hour east of Athens, close to the river, close to the Ohio River near Reedsville, or Coolsville, actually. Coolsville Road, and I think that's related to the Indrid Cold name, actually, maybe. He came up with the name, or it related somehow to Coolsville, or maybe he chose Coolsville as his landing spot because of the name game issue.
Yep.
But I think I figured out what Indrid means. Or, I came up with that other theory about the Garuda, that it related to Indra, and the cooling of Indra, meaning, i.e. Garuda. But there's another meaning, which is related to the flying saucers, which he flew around, supposedly. And I'm actually starting to think that he really was flying around a real saucer. Not, an extraterrestrial, but a Nazi saucer left over from the war, or after the war. And there's lots of little things pointing to this now, that they really were building saucers somewhere in West Virginia, and perhaps, or maybe just parts for them or something. But if they were building them in the TNT area, it would explain all of the different UFOs that were seen.
What time period would that be again?
Well, that was right during Mothman in 67.
Yeah, all right.
And, but there's been sightings all over Ohio for decades, so I think some of those are just real, they're semi-hallucinatory events where people, it's the ancient phenomenon where people do see things, and these occultists that were linked to the Nazis, or were Nazis, I think they studied that and they figured out that they could mimic that and use their saucers to do mind control on people and cover it all up by calling it extraterrestrial.
Well, I wonder about this. Let me just get this out. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is probably the most interesting Air Force facility east of the Mississippi. And I would say, I'm hearing stuff now about Moffett out on the coast near Mountain View and a little south of the Bay Area. And I'm just wondering if some of these places don't serve as some kind of haven, if you will? Is it, could it be? I'm wondering. I don't see why not, especially Wright-Patterson, because I don't know. Some funky things went on with that, even back to Kennedy's assassination and what happened to the car, and the limo that he was in. Not that it's a big deal, but would it be possible that some of these things had happened? In fact, a listener in Kentucky was saying the same thing, in eastern Kentucky. And it's been a while now. I don't remember all that he said, but he also chalked up some strange, occurrences being in some kind of proximity to Wright-Patterson.
Well, I think Wright-Patterson was obviously the place where things were where the military was keeping an eye on everything and doing the PSYOPs, planning the PSYOPs. But I think the saucers were being built by private companies like AV Rowe, which is British, which everybody, there's a solid documentation that they were building a saucer. It went black once it was discovered anti-gravity was sort of figured out, and that would have been around the time that Schauberger he was the Nazi who came up with the saucer idea, or he came up with the motive engine that worked. 10 years after the end of the war, they brought him over to Long Island, to Brookhaven, which used to be a Nazi youth facility, the big one that the Bushes and the Walkers and everybody, and where they had the Congress, where they planned that famous Nazi conference in New York at Madison Square Garden. Then they built an atomic research lab there. So what does that tell you? It tells you that after the war, the Nazi atomic research was brought over, and we started continuing it here. So they brought Schauberger over. A lot of his stuff had been destroyed at the end of the war, so the Russians wouldn't get it. But he had developed several different UFOs, and they got him to repeat all of the information, to redraw the diagrams, et cetera, and it was some guy named Donner who was a steel magnate, Richard Donner, and he stole the patents from Schauberger, basically. They lied to him. They had, lots of fine print in the documents he signed, and they basically still have those today. But as soon as they got those patents, all of the media attention that was really there was quite a bit of it at the time about anti-gravity research and free energy, that all disappeared from the public arena.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think because they finally had it and they wanted to keep it secret. And that's why, so that was like 1958, and then within a few years, it probably took them a while to build the things. Suddenly you had all of these abductions and things happening in the mid-60s right around here. So, and Gray Barker writes about an abduction that occurred to a guy who worked at the AV Rowe. He was working on that Avro saucer. It was called the Avro.
Yep, that's right. Mm-hmm.
The way that all went away and they didn't work on it anymore, but obviously they were, because there were witnesses coming forward to say, hey, a SWAT team broke into my house and interrogated me, blah, blah, blah. And that was in West Virginia. So it looks like they were building them there, and that follows the template that they had done in Germany, where they were building these saucers at a carbide, basically a sister plant of carbides over there, which was the Dora Mittelbau facility, which was also building rockets and everything else with Werner von Braun. And then he came over here and headed up NASA security. So NASA, I think, obviously NASA agents were involved in these abductions.
Sure. Well,
and
but Andy, that too dovetails with what was going on in Canada, and I can't remember the movie's title. You might recall it. Dan Aykroyd played a principal role in it, serious role, and I think he also funded the film. I'm not sure, but it was all about the Avro. I mean, the Canadians had beaten the United States. I guess, and I'm stretching now here, but certainly with fighter planes that could go a certain Mach, but also they had built, I believe, an anti-gravity craft that they showed off in a parade up in Canada. And then what happened was, and this is during Eisenhower's presidency, so it had to happen before 62, 54 to 62. The United States went up there, grabbed all the plans, grabbed a number of the scientists, brought them back down to the United States, I think either in Houston and or California, and had them work for us. I don't think there's only one survivor left from that group, but this sounds like the same thing. It's like, okay, hold on a second, you guys are way ahead, and we want that stuff, so NASA scrapped it. Do you remember that at all, Andy?
I don't remember that part of it, but it all makes sense in terms of, Carbide had a big facility up there. It would have been a Carbide facility that was building them probably down here, and Carbide has facilities up in Canada, and that's perhaps how they did it. And of course, we had a Carbide guy who obviously knew James Earl Ray. So James Earl Ray, was using the name of a Carbide employee up there. So there's all these assassination links to these same guys that were doing the UFO ops. But yeah, well, it's all British. I mean, A.V. Rowe was British, so having them do stuff in Canada makes sense. And there was a British angle with, the British were on top of the whole Nazi game, actually. I think were actually helping build some of the Nazi planes during the war. The Fokker, or however you pronounce it.
Fokker, yeah.
There's a lot of interwoven stuff going on, not only with the British, but with American companies, with the Nazis. So, and the British were the ones that really cracked the Nazi code, and they knew exactly what was going on in South America after the war. They were using a satellite system that Perón had requested to be built, and they were tapping into that satellite system to figure out exactly what was happening with the Nazis in South America, and then they disseminated that judiciously to the other countries. So if you wanted to blame anybody for paperclip and everything else, you could probably blame the British more than you could the Americans. Oh,
without a doubt. And just as an aside too, what I always thought was interesting, and I didn't realize why this was until just a few years ago, but when I watched any kind of footage from Argentine or Chilean military, if I got this right, I mean, they were using the Nazi helmets. Now, the United States has adopted that. It was probably a better helmet, I would have to say. But when I looked at their military, it just reminded me, obviously, of the Nazi army. And then, of course, later on I realized, if that wasn't a coincidence, what kind of influence was in South America after World War II. And, of course, that leads also to the story of Colonia Dignidad, which just got busted a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to jump forward to now just for a second. There's now an Argentine alien film that's out. Supposedly they filmed an alien in Argentina. I looked at the footage, and it's obviously manipulated footage. The shadows aren't right and so forth. But going back now, you were talking about Dignidad. Well, I've discovered, it's in Joseph Farrell's work. It's all, and also the Jim Marrs book that just came out on the Fourth Reich. But Bariloche, Argentina was where Borman went. And I remember seeing a CBS, I think 60 Minutes went there once and interviewed some old Nazis or found an old Nazi. So it's a well-known town, and it's where they had a plastic surgery center. So after the war, the Nazis could go down there and get their faces changed.
Right.
And that hospital is now like a health spa, new age kind of place. And I'm wondering if that isn't Lanulos, where some of these West Virginia, Ohio contactees were taken, like Woody Derenberger, who described it as a jungle place where people were nude. So, and the Germans were big on nudism, or whatever you want to call it. So that's probably where he was taking. And what cemented it for me was when you spell Lanulos backwards, it's Salunol, which means radiative shock waves. Now, we talked about that earlier, but what I didn't know then was that this is exactly the kind of experimentation that was going on in Bariloche, because another Nazi scientist, I never finished my Schauberger story, by the way, so I want to go back to that, but another scientist whose name escapes me at the moment was doing plasma research with an atomic reactor there and a particle accelerator, and he was basically shock-waving plasma to try to ignite different kinds of atomic cores. They were trying to come up with a non-atomic bomb where they could, I don't know what the goal exactly was. Well, I guess it was so that they could inhabit the area after they blown it up.
Well, is that anything like the neutron, which would go ahead and kill people but not necessarily do anything to physical plants?
Yeah, or an isomer bomb, which I just heard about at the Mothman Festival. It's a similar kind of bomb that doesn't leave radioactive signature. But that Brown's gas we talked about before actually supposedly reverses radioactivity. If you can create it, you can also reverse it.
Okay.
And the Brown's gas basically implodes things. You can. The problem is you can't do a wide area with it, but you could take a piece of metal that was highly radioactive and bombard it with the gas. The gas implodes which is cold fusion basically, and it just changes the nature of the ions so that they're no longer
charged,
radiant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before you go back to the Schallenberg story, Schallenberger, is it?
Well, let me finish this though.
Okay.
There's a lot to talk about. Okay. So, well, maybe I did finish it.
Well, here's what I wanted to say. I want you to go back to it, but just before you leave where you're going now, I just have to ask you this. This hospital is located where, in Argentina?
Yeah, Bariloche.
All right. I'm just wondering, last question I got about this, and I'll let you get back on track, and I apologize for digressing, but I wonder if this also has anything to do with Mengele and his experiments.
Yes.
Okay.
He was there.
All right. Thank you.
He was definitely there. He lived there.
Right.
But I hope in 5 years people don't start blogging about this and acting like Stephen Greer came up with the idea.
All right.
Anyway, this is happening, we're starting to get stories that are coming up about these particular things I've been talking about for 5 years, and they're being attributed to the wrong people. They're being attributed to people that are ET proselytizers. So that's a weird little twist in the story here, is that they sit on the information, they try to, I'm getting conspiratorial here, they try to inhibit the research of people that are really trying to find the truth, and then finally when they can't hide it anymore, they take credit for it.
Well, Andy, and I'll tell you what, I think that the advent of blogs does nobody any good, really, with good information. To me, when blogs came on the scene, all I've ever seen is misinformation, disinformation, and anybody who's got something serious going on gets enticed to get into these discussions and debates that just never end. And that's why, to me, I stay away from them, because as far as I'm concerned, dealing with people in blogs is like wrestling with seaweed. You know what I mean? You never get out of it. I mean, basically what I'm saying are blogs suck.
Well, yeah, and the new memes that are out there right now are that UFOs are compromising our nuclear facilities. That's one. It's totally bogus. If anything, they're protecting the nuclear facilities.
Yeah.
Because who's got the resources to build a UFO that can then go spy on other countries' nuclear facilities? Well, there aren't many countries that could do that to us right now. There might be a few. So some of them might be spying. But I would imagine a lot of them are watching over these facilities because it's cheaper. In the old days, they used to use CAP, Civil Air Patrol. I just heard this recently. They were using CAP guys to monitor the different munitions plants to help keep an eye on things.
Okay.
And you might want to remind me of that later, because I talked to a witness who said her grandfather did that in Ohio at the Ultramarine factory, which makes blue. It makes all those special blue dyes. So it's a IG Farben cutout company. It was located in Chansey, Ohio, and then it moved to Huntington, West Virginia. It's been around for 100 years.
Yeah.
And it's for some Germans founded it basically. And I think that's this very same factory, because later it became the BASF factory.
That's right, yeah.
And I think that's the one that Tracy Twyman was talking about as perhaps making gas for for the war or potentially doing it again, for the gassing people.
Yeah, is that the one that's also alongside railroad tracks, if I got that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, the Bilderbergers, I don't know why I thought of this, but was a Farben it was based on a Farben company called Farben Builder. A subsidiary of IG Farben is where the Bilderbergers came from, because the director of it was Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands,
right.
And he's the one who basically started the Bilderbergers.
That's right. Okay.
But Lamulose, Salunol, points toward Bariloche, and also Indrid Cold's name, which what Schauberger's basic idea was you implode air. So we're still working with implosion here and not explosion. You funnel air into a tube. He came up with a ram's horn type spline, I guess, that would be in the UFO. So the UFO would have splines just like the black sun emblem, and then air is forced into a smaller and smaller point at the very end where it implodes on itself and it creates an anti-gravity effect. You're actually changing the molecular structure of air, whatever, O2 or I don't know what all air has in it. Is it just O2? It's a bunch of stuff, isn't it?
I would think water's in there too. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. H2O2? I don't know, but
something like that.
It creates an anti-gravity effect, and it creates a great deal of pressure coming out, so the thing can shoot straight up. And it also cools it, because the cooling effect helps create the frictionless thing that you're after. And Schauberger discovered this because he wasn't an engineer, he was a naturalist. And he studied fish, and he realized that fish were cooling down their body temperatures to a really low degree, and that was helping create a frictionless situation where they could just sit in the water without moving. And so this is how he happened upon this design. And so once you got the thing spinning, it just lifted off, and it didn't need any power. It didn't need any really much, nuclear power or anything like that. It just runs off of air. And that's the free energy that all of the different UFO researchers were being warned away from by the men in black in Point Pleasant. Why? Because they were building the things there, and nobody wanted anybody to know what was going on and how they were doing it. And Indrid Cold had one of these. She was flying it around. People saw him standing on it, in a saucer hovering above the school grounds. Now, they also saw a similar craft in Greenlawn, Long Island, which is near it was just near the atomic facility, the old Nazi camp. And it was hovering above a post office. And this is one of the stories that was in Barker's book, The Men in Black, Secret Terror Among Us. He's talking about the Joseph Henslick case. Henslick saw the UFO hovering above the post office, took some pictures. He was harassed by Men in Black. The pictures recently showed up again, and they do show UFO over the post office. Well, why were they over the post office? They were probably stealing mail, monitoring mail, or stealing uniforms, because some of the Men in Black were going around as postmen to spy on people. So what these ex-Nazis couldn't get legitimately through whatever backdoor channels, they would just go and take a saucer, perhaps, and fly somewhere and just steal stuff. And then it was easy to debunk it by calling the witness crazy, unless the witness took pictures, and then the Men in Black had to come in and do some work on them.
Oh, by the way, the composition of air, dry air, it's 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and about 1% argon, and then there's other things like small amounts of hydrogen, xenon, krypton, helium, and neon.
So there's enough stuff in there that when you start messing with it molecularly, you can get different effects. And Indrid Cold's name basically is very, very similar to the word inward, which is what you're doing. You're forcing the air inward on itself, and you're making it cold. And this is how the saucers work. So I think in his name and in the different aspects of the story, you can clearly see that it points to ex-Nazis. In fact, the landing spot is very near a German cemetery near Reedsville, which is called, or Coolsville, which is called Heine Cemetery. And
beautiful.
Yeah, it's a very old cemetery. It looks like some of the graves are from the 1700s even. And and a lot of Moorish names in the cemetery. So that's an interesting angle. Maybe some of these Germans are Moorish as well. And one of the tombstones said, and we didn't realize this until later that it might have significance, but it said he used to ride the wind. He thought he could ride the wind, but now he rides the ghost horse.
Well, that's interesting.
I took a picture of it, but I didn't get the guy's name. I should have, because later I found out that the very last Vril saucer that Schauberger designed, the Vril 7, was called the Ghost. So somebody buried in that cemetery actually may be Indrid Cold even. Or maybe someone that was working with him.
Let me ask you once, I'm sorry, the facility in Long Island, what town is that in?
The what? Say that again?
The facility that you're talking about, a quasi-Nazi compound out in Long Island?
Yaffank. Yaffank was the old German village with the Nazi camp and everything, and that's where they built Brookhaven, basically, right next to it.
All right.
But the town that Henslick was in was Greenlawn, which is very close to that.
Well, I'm looking at it now because, not to distract you, but another thing that came to me also, I mean, Long Island's kind of funky, and obviously the further east you go in Long Island, the less people you encounter. So you can probably get some things done out there. But also in that region, I believe, if I got this right, I don't know. I think Plum Island, which is a level 5 hazmat facility, is out there as well. Did you come across that at all?
What? Plum Island being what?
Like I said, it's the highest level hazmat facility. And I don't know if that means they're doing biologicals out there. I assume so. And there is a story that Lyme disease came out of there from the people who worked in Plum Island and then ferried back to Lyme, Connecticut.
Go
ahead.
Well, Jim Mars talks about this in his book about how the Nazis put all their money into these pharmaceuticals, and now they're coming up and creating diseases or trying to convince you that you have a disease that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
In order to sell more drugs to us and keep us mollified while they destroy our country from the inside out. They're tanking the economies and everybody's depressed, so now let's give them antidepressants. Let's do whatever we can. Let's make pot legal. All these things to keep us not paying attention to what they're doing. And I think this is what Eisenhower was referring to when he said the military-industrial complex. He was talking about the ex-Nazis. He wasn't talking about because he was a military guy, so why would he attack his own? He wouldn't. He was referring to a specific group, probably the same group that Jack Ruby was referring to when he told Chief Justice Warren that the country has been taken over and we're going to see a new form of government.
Yeah, good point.
He said that in his jail cell right before he died.
Yeah. Okay. No.
Speaking of which, who we think is his son, Jeff Ruby, has started a restaurant in Cincinnati with Bootsy Collins, who I have some tangential connections to. Bootsy's a funkadelic guy who has had some alien experiences, and he used to play with James Brown. James Brown used to know Muhammad Ali, and supposedly, I met Tanya Derenberger, by the way, at the festival. She says that Muhammad Ali carried a copy of Visitors from Emmanuel, her dad's book, with her into the ring every time he fought. I have no idea if that's true or not, but Ali did attend parties with at Jim Mosley's place, the UFO researcher who was friends with Gray Bark. So that's a whole other weird corner of this story. And I think who's the other funkadelic guy? George Clinton has claims that he's had UFO experiences. But getting back to let's say we talked about the landing spot. One thing that Tanya Derenberger told me. She's a nice lady, by the way. She told me that her dad disappeared for weeks at a time, and I said, well, maybe they took him to Bariloche, Argentina, and she didn't flinch at all. And I showed her the photo of this new man in black that Alan Greenfield took a picture of. And she cannot rule out that he was not one of the Vendred Cold's assistants. She thought she recognized him. This is another important piece of information.
Is this the guy that is this the photo I got that you sent me? This guy looks like a Lee Harvey Oswald look-alike, or is that something else?
Well, that's another guy, the Lee Harvey Oswald.
All right.
Like, this is a guy with sunglasses. He was spying on the 1969 UFO convention in West Virginia in Charleston. Greenfield took a picture of him. Harriet then said, who's with me, by the way? We're going to have her on here in a minute.
Hi, Harriet. Yeah, okay.
She said she saw this guy in front of her house in 67, I think, 68. And he's probably connected with Jack Bruno, the Philadelphia mobster, who apparently was in cahoots with J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover was in charge of, what was that? He and LBJ were the two guys most probably that had the power over the JFK assassination, because Hoover's had his fingers in everything. He was in Interpol, so in the ex-Nazis, he probably knew about the saucers. In fact, Hoover was responsible for protecting the defense facilities in those days. He was head of DISC, with Defense Industrial Security Command, which now is controlled by the NSA. So Hoover and Johnson was the head of NASA when he was vice president, so he would have had control over NASA security. These are our two main groups that were probably pulling off these UFO abductions. How did I get off on those guys?
Oh, by the way, I wanted to tell you, I took a look on a map, and Brookhaven that you were talking about, right? Or Yafank, whatever that was going on there. That's off Interstate 495, much to the east. I mean, I guess that's got to be Suffolk County. But the thing is, Plum Island is off the northern fork of Long Island. If you can remember, it splits out to the east, out to its eastern end. Plum Island is out there. You could get to it by Highway 25, which is what picks up when 495 ends. So, not that close, but obviously both of them could probably have things going on that really nobody's going to stumble upon. And they were in somewhat proximity to one another. So I just want to throw that out there.
All right.
Sorry.
Well, I kind of got off on track. I got off on Hoover there for a second. I don't know where I was heading before that.
Are we still trying to get back to Schallenberger?
Well, we were talking about Ardo. I think this guy that Harriet saw was Carlo Ardo, Indrid's assistant. That's where I was. I was talking about Tanya Derenberger verifying that photo, or saying that it might be legitimate. As I was talking to her, 3 men in black showed up at the festival. They were dressed in shorts and everything. They've changed their dress.
Casual, huh?
Yeah, baseball caps, shorts, all the same color shorts, white socks, tennis shoes, all the same haircuts. They all had expensive cameras, and they were taking pictures of everybody right in their face. It was really weird. Phil Reynolds, pointed him out and he said that the police were after him. The police, people were complaining, and the security guys tracked him down, but then they let him keep taking pictures. So that tells you something. And I've got a photo of them that's going to be in the new book, Mothman Speaks. I just sent the photos off for the book, so we should see that before Thanksgiving. And that's going to be a dynamite book. Harriet wrote a lot of great letters, and a lot of other people wrote some good stuff too. You want to talk to Harriet for a minute? I've still got about probably 12 interesting items, and when I come back, I can touch on those. whatever Harriet doesn't hit, I can cover.
Yeah. Also, I saved a couple of your emails with some intriguing stuff. You've touched upon some of it. That would be the standard ultramarine, Montauk Energy, and of course the letter that was dated around October 5th, 1961. That was addressed to George Bush. So anyway, I just want to let you know that stuff's out there. I hung on to that because I found it really interesting. So anyway, sure.
Okay, yeah, we'll come back to those last two, and Harriet can fill you in on whatever she feels like going into. She's been researching some of the sightings in this area, and there's been a lot of them, including a large bird sighting, a thunderbird, more or less, just 5 years ago here in Fredericksburg, or down the road a little bit in Mount Vernon. And anything else she's got going on.
Okay.
Here she comes.
Hey, Biz.
How you doing, Harriet?
I'm great. How are you?
All right. Good to hear from you again.
Good.
All right.
So what do you got, Harriet?
I'm great. Anytime Andy comes to town, it's always interesting.
That would be another word for it, yeah.
Yeah. I'll give you a great piece of interest, and, only near the Ohio-West Virginia border could this happen. We stopped to eat lunch at a Hardee's right on the river in Belpre, which is basically across the river from Parkersburg, West Virginia. And we get out of the car, and lo and behold, looking across the car, there's a sign there at the base of a tree that says Adena Indian Mound, 500 BC, 100 feet at the base, conical-shaped Indian mound. And we thought, only here could somebody build a Hardee's on a sacred site. It was just too much. And the only thing that would have made that perfect would have been some hillbilly smoking a cigarette with his back up against a tree sitting on top of the Indian mound. But, it was interesting.
Yeah, you can hope for it, but it doesn't always happen. Okay.
Yeah, if you can hear him, there was a Mothman sighting there 2 years ago.
Okay. Now you said you're in Fredericton right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's near Parkersburg, West Virginia. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I got it on the map. I'm trying to get my bearings here, but now I see where you're at. Okay.
Yeah. So it was pretty interesting. There's all kinds of interesting phenomenon that happen in that area. There's everything from UFO sightings to big bird sightings, lots of Bigfoot sightings. So I don't know what it is about that area. It just seems to attract that.
Yeah, well, it might be the water.
Yeah, could be.
Okay.
But the area we're in today, which is about 60 miles north of Columbus in Morrow, Mingo County, that area, there's been plenty of Bigfoot sightings, flap of them in the late 70s, 77, 78, 2002, 2005. Alien and craft sightings in the early 70s, 72, 73. Lots of hauntings. Just lots of activity up here. This is a very big Amish community up here, as well as a former Indian community. We believe the Mingos.
Oh, well, let me ask you this. Are you telling me that section has an inordinate amount of sightings, or is it just, compared to like other sections in other states in that area, or is it just that you guys have centered more on it, or is there something going on there?
Well, there's possibly something going on here. As you know, Ohio is a hotbed anyway, but there are certain areas in Ohio that just seem to attract the phenomenon. One was where we were a couple days ago down near the Ohio River, central Ohio, and then again way up north around Canton, Akron area, and Cleveland, too, has its share. There don't seem to be as many in western Ohio.
Well,
of course, you're closer to the mountains.
Well, that's what I was thinking, too. I don't know if the mountainous terrain in that area facilitates, and to a certain extent I think it probably does, hiding whatever. When you're out in the flatlands that begin pretty much in western Ohio and then continue on. I don't know, but you said Ohio's a hotbed. Andy and I through the years, too, have talked about West Virginia, what's going on there, and the fact that even the X-Files somewhat kind of gave you an indication that things are interesting out in that tri-state area with West Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania.
I wish I could say what it is, but maybe it's just the proximity to Washington, D.C. Hard to say.
Well, I've spent some time down in Athens in that whole area, and that's interesting, too. So.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And also, I mean, I don't know if anything's got to do with this. Here you have a lot of mines, supposedly closed down mines. And again, with what's going on underground, who knows? And I don't mean to go that far afield, but it seems that that's the case. And that's what everybody talks about with regard to Denver Airport and the Rockies out there. Colorado, another mining state. Maybe not coal, but silver, gold, copper, zinc, and such. And I just don't know what lends itself. In fact, it probably would be a hoot to find out exactly what's going on beneath our feet.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've always kind of wondered if we didn't have some kind of underground bases around here or something going on. I mean, we know at Sugar Grove in West Virginia there's a big underground area there, but, you kind of wonder in Ohio if there isn't something. There's too many strange things. And I want to ask you what you know about a particular incident, because Andy and I were talking about it earlier. It was about 1953 with President Eisenhower being part of some type of a summit, and wondering if you had ever heard that he had met aliens in that summit and fainted. Did you ever heard about that?
I was 2 years old when that happened, so I wasn't privy to the details. But
you never actually heard about it happening?
Yeah, I have encountered that. I don't know by what source that comes. It's been quite some time, but yeah, definitely there was some information to the fact that, Eisenhower all got together and said, okay, aliens are real. That might also go back to, and I'm sorry that I can't remember the gentleman's name. He's deceased. Phil, and I can't get the last name out, who actually spoke about this as well or uncovered stuff and therefore was rubbed out. I think he has a lot to do out in Colorado, perhaps with that Denver airport. Who did you mention,
Schneider?
Harriet?
Schneider?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Andy Colvin.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's all together, but I do remember that there was supposedly this meeting in 53 or 54 where, what did they do? Tell Dwight, we're real?
Yeah, pretty much, I guess. And supposedly he fainted right on the big table or something, so we're just kind of talking about that, and I think Andy might have a few things to say about that as well, so I'm going to pass it back to him.
All
I can just see he's chomping at the bit here.
Hello.
Hey. And by the way, you have to admit, Andy, of all the things that people have been dealing with and wondering about, there is nothing that has been longer and more, I guess, intensely scrutinized by mainstream public, really, than the whole thing about UFOs. And you got to wonder, that's for a reason, and it could be a mixture of a lot of things, but I think it's kept deliberately muddied with tinfoil hat wearers and others, just so that nobody really gets down to it. But when you hear a situation like what Harriet was just addressing that you guys had talked about before, apparently, about Eisenhower being told this is the way it is, I mean, I don't really have a problem with that.
Well, when you consider that the word alien may refer to ex-Nazis who are alien to our country, if you plug ex-Nazi in every time you hear alien, it makes a lot more sense. And Eisenhower was probably clued into the MJ-12 group at that time. And Jim Mars has a great section in his book. He covers every MJ-12 member and details how they were linked into the ex-Nazis. So Eisenhower probably did faint when he heard that they actually had developed these craft.
Well, yeah, I wonder also, though, if he wasn't aware of what was going on out there, but at least it was attached to human beings, that something might have gone beyond that, maybe another whole thing. Nobody really knows on the record what all was found when the Allies invaded Berlin, and whoever got in there first as a cleanup team, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody really knows. And I mean, I am, not that this is like central to what we're talking about, but I don't think that Hitler committed suicide and was found in the bunker. I don't think, because to me, and you were talking about this before, with the war and stuff, I mean, it was incestuous. I mean, the Germans and the Brits are like what, one gene removed? And Churchill knew what the story was, and Hitler knew what the story was, and Roosevelt knew what the story was, and surely Stalin did too. I mean, to me, this was a big game, and Hitler, for all that he did and didn't do, was certainly a marionette in this whole thing.
Absolutely. You know, there's some great stuff in there in the Mars book about Hitler and how he was controlled in various ways. You know, he was a non-smoker, non-drinker, vegetarian, and in the beginning, they were okay with him because he was pushing things forward. He was doing the racist thing, which, you know, helped.
Right.
Or whatever. You know, these people, their motto, the old globalist motto is the end justifies the means.
Mm-hmm.
So that all makes sense. And you were referring to, changing the subject slightly, you were talking about mining, and I think that obviously goes to the globalists, and it also goes to the Masons in a way, because when they were first building these cathedrals and things, they were mining basically to get, you know, they were developing the technology to dig and get things out of the earth. And so it makes sense that they would also have this occult background to these different mining companies and oil companies. It really is the center of this whole thing. I mean, if these things get done, people get knocked off, it gets covered up, you have great terrorist events. The only people that can cover these up are people in power who also know the symbols, know the codes, and can actually affect change in that way. And so I don't think we need to be looking, you know, to the skies, like to outer space, you know, for the answers on this. I do think that there is a real phenomenon where you see these energy based things in the sky that can make your mind will turn it into an alien or a Bigfoot or whatever. And I think they simply studied that through their occult interests and found out how to manipulate it or how to fake it or you know, use it.
And by the way, I think we're going to see a lot of things revealed from this point forward, more so than ever before, because I think we're coming to a certain end of one epoch and the beginning of another. And, you know, it's interesting because it really still goes back to Europe. I mean, Europe is the center of the world. We think we are, but we're not. And it's going to go back to another Roman Empire, so to speak. And the Europeans are probably the preferred people. And nobody really knows all that went on. And I find it interesting with Germany especially, why Germany was picked to go ahead and get into a fight with the rest of the world, you know, twice within how many years? Like 20. And now, without making a whole lot of noise about this, that probably the sturdiest, most prosperous member of the EU is Germany. Now, I don't think that means they're going to be on the rise again for warfare or whatever, but, you know, I don't know what's going on, but you know, whatever went on in Germany, especially in the years with Hitler and such, more stuff than we've ever been told about, no doubt about it. In fact, I didn't even realize the occult connection until I read a book by a pastor that whose church we went to, Lady Biz and I, out in Pennsylvania for the 2 years we were there. And that's when I started, really. That's one of the bricks in the wall for me that made me understand conspiracy, and that is because I never thought that Hitler perhaps was, shall we say, serving a higher being, certainly not Jehovah. And that's when I started to get it about the New World Order, evil, Satan, the whole 9 yards. And certainly there's... Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to wrap it up and say, certainly I have a feeling that whatever went down between Germany and Rome during those number of decades probably has a key to a lot. But, you know, whether we'll ever find out, I don't know. But like I said, a lot of stuff that will be revealed is happening now.
Yeah, well, you know, as the mining thing progressed, they got into oil, and that was all developed in the Kanawha Valley, basically. Gas drilling led to oil drilling and all the technologies, and they put all the chemical plants there. And then when they brought Hitler in, you know, because Standard hooks up with the European powers that you're talking about, they bring Hitler in, he looks pretty good. He's in on the occult thing. He's okay with all that. But he's a bit of an idealist in his vegetarian and non-smoking, non-drinking ways. And as he starts to promote those more and more, he gets more on the wrong side of these guys, because the oil guys started the pharmaceuticals and they wanted to push synthetic drugs. They didn't want to push healthy living, nudist colonies, or anything like that. They wanted alcohol, tobacco, drugs, everything you can use to make money and control people. And that's one of the reasons they got rid of him or turned on him, according to Marx.
Well, I think there's another element in there too. Not that, who cares what I think, but when you take a look at the military wanting to turn on their leader, I also think that they started to realize that the game was rigged. And of course, when you remember, and Harriet remembers, we all remember the stories about the Normandy invasion, that the Fuhrer didn't want to be awakened. And I'm like, get out of here. I mean, right. You see this whole flotilla coming across, like the largest ever, and you're not going to wake up the Fuhrer? I'd risk the firing squad for that. There's just certain things that just seem so stupid to me. And I just got done watching that movie, Valkyrie. And, and I'm saying, when you get the generals getting together, they realize that something badly is happening. So I think that they realized that they weren't fighting the war the way they should. And that's only what I can posit. I would think there's some credibility to that as well. So whether he turned on the real deal, which will get you killed every time, like Kennedy found out, or whether or not his own people realized that he was throwing the war, one or the other. But usually, obviously, if you go along with the plan that you've been given, you'll be left alone. I don't know. So. Well,
Kennedy went awry in various ways, but one of them was that he knew about this whole ex-Nazi military-industrial complex, and he wrote about it in his first book about why Britain slept. And that it makes it clear in there that he knew the basic plan or what was going on, and then he got caught messing around with an ex-Nazi or a Nazi agent who was I think she was a princess of Denmark, one of the one of the pseudo royalty members of the royalty in Denmark, and so they moved him out of D.C. and put him on the PT-109 to get him away from her. And so they knew that he knew, and then of course Vatican wasn't happy that he wasn't going along with that program either. And of course all the other stuff he did with printing up the money outside of the Federal Reserve and the oil depletion allowance and everything, the ex-Nazis were the ones that were the most, ex-Nazi globalists were the ones, or the ones that were sympathetic, like Ford and Rockefeller and those guys, Font, they all turned against him. And it's interesting that they went ahead and used the NASA wing, more or less, to kill him, or at least to set Oswald up. He was surrounded by NASA agents, and in fact, he said one of the last things he said was that his next job was going to be working for NASA after the school book depository.
Yeah, that didn't work out too well.
But Hitler, General Patton was moving in on this. Apparently his job was to find this Nazi technology. And that explains some of his odd movements out in the hinterlands around Berlin. And it also explains why he was off. Because he found out, apparently was even shown a film of the saucers after the war by Reinhard Gehlen. I think it was Gehlen.
Well,
do you remember, did I ever tell you that story about Jimmy Bishop, a writer back in the 50s and 60s, who was the uncle of a friend of mine, and what he had said about Patton? Do you remember that?
No.
All right, real quick, because this explains a lot of stuff. This is like, we're talking 1973, and of course I wasn't even thinking about the things I am now, but one of my best friends, the uncle was Jimmy Bishop. He's known for writing the books called The Day That Christ Died and The Day That Lincoln was Assassinated. It was the day It was a series of books, the day this, the day that, okay? Now, what he had said was, he was in Germany at the end of the war, and he said he could never understand how Patton got killed in a Jeep accident when he saw him in the hospital under guard. Okay? That's all I'm going to tell you. He said he never understood how Patton got in the Jeep. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
So that was an assassination. There's no doubt about it. And, of course, with the rules that we assume they live by, and that is if you screw up with the plan, if you try to ad-lib, go renegade, you're going to get killed. Hence Kennedy and perhaps Patton. Whatever he was looking for or whatever it was about, of course, they always say, too, that he wanted to go ahead and duke with Russia right then and there. That also could be a cover story. But I think we can agree that he was assassinated.
Yeah, and I think he was a Wilson. I think he was related to the Wilson family. Peter Moon talks about the name Wilson and how it shows up in these conspiracies so much. That Ronald Reagan was a Wilson. I think Patton was. And interestingly, I met a Mothman witness at the festival whose last name was Wilson, who saw Mothman at this place Harriet was talking about, the Indian Mound overlooking Blennerhassett Island, which is where Aaron Burr was trying to set up his
empire,
pseudo-British empire. Wilson saw Mothman fly across the river there, and his mother was there and verified that, he had actually seen that at the time and had, had some trauma, was somewhat traumatized by it. He definitely seemed, I don't know. I knew when he walked up that he had seen Mothman. That's all I can say. And that happened 3 times.
Are you talking about Wilson in the bloodline of Woodrow?
I don't know if Woodrow was, but the guys that started, Thorne EMI were Wilsons, and they supposedly invented a lot of major things and for some reason did not want to take credit for it, the Wilson brothers. And they were hooked in with Aleister Crowley. Crowley's father, I think, invested in their company. And today it's EMI. But they invented several different transistors, resistors, electrical things. And I can't remember all the different Wilson things.
Well, the reason I bring it up also is because our handlers, the robber barons, were pretty much in control then, perhaps not of Congress and the Senate, but they were getting there. And, they went to a certain lengths to make sure that Wilson got into office, and that was to drag Teddy Roosevelt's ass back out to draw votes off Taft so that Wilson could be in. There's a reason why that happened. And, of course, under Wilson, you got the Federal Reserve Act and the income tax. So those are 2 heavy hits to the American people that occurred under Wilson's watch, and I'm sure they wanted him there. And that's the only reason I asked you whether that's the same bloodline, because apparently they wanted him to do, at least to sit and preside over what was going to take place. And of course, he was an academic out of New Jersey, but he was handpicked, I'm sure, and that's one of the reasons why. And I'm only saying this also because understand something as well. I think there's a lot of parallels between Wilson's presidency, FDR's presidency, and Obama's. All men were handles. All are going through certain same dynamics, be it separated by decades. And what I'm interested in, and just let me go on this little digression for a second, and that is the Tea Party is not grassroots in the true sense of grassroots. There's heavy money behind it. They organize quickly. They got things going. But what I'm looking at is perhaps a very, shall we say, ornate, you can say conspiracy, whatever you want, because here's where I'm going with this. That Tea Party, which espouses supposedly return to, basics and the Constitution and reduce taxes, all this stuff, if they run a presidential candidate, it would somewhat be like it was back in Roosevelt's first run, Wilson's first run, where they become a third party, which can only dash the Republican side of things and throw the election the second time around to Obama. And it was during Wilson's second term that he got us in the war that he said he wouldn't. And Roosevelt got us into the war just inside his third. term right after his second. So what I'm saying is I think we're looking at perhaps at another situation where it seems like it's so well, that these things are being tabled and we're going to return to this stuff. And in essence, what they'll do is they'll throw the election to Obama. So I'm just throwing that out.
And now that Obama has announced that we were out of our recession, we can now spend some more money on another war.
And I'll just say this, and I mean, anybody can do this kind of stuff, and I don't like to mess with it, but I've got to think that next year we're going to get hit with a pretty good economic collapse. It's going to happen when, no matter what. And it may be tied into a global one. This may not just be us this time around, not that we were the only ones back in 29 and 32. But there's a lot of similarities between all three Democrat presidents and their Republican predecessors and the former two, Roosevelt and Wilson, and their involvement with world wars. I think that's pretty much what's looming on the horizon. And I think next year may be a very critical year where the economic balloon blows.
Well, I think that's a great theory, and that's the way to do it. Is to look at the patterns that they've already set in the past, because they like to repeat them. Definitely. Yeah,
I would say it's almost too simple, and it may not always go that way. And and I hate to say this is not something I call a hobby, because it has got vast implications, deadly implications for a lot of us. But I just look at what they're doing now, and it would be so ironic for this supposedly back to the basics Tea Party grassroots thing to actually throw the election to a Democrat, and off we go into world wars and economic declines. And also, let's not forget that as Roosevelt had to deal with the Depression, also we had the Panic of '08, and that's the reason why the bankers got together a year later and concocted the Federal Reserve, which they would spring under Wilson's presidency. So you got an economic situation started under Republican administrations, handed over to Democrats, and the Democrats therefore have to deal with the problem and also get us into a war. So I'm sorry, but this is looking awful familiar.
Well, it's really genius planning, because it's so indirect and so hard to believe that kind of ornate thing could be planned, but it's absolutely true, and it's absolutely what happens time and time again.
Well, I was just going to say to you, can you imagine when the presidential election occurs, in November 2012, I guess that would be? Or 11. Probably 11, whatever. However it goes, forget it.
Well,
wait, it would be November 12, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you imagine with this Tea Party gaining so much impetus and getting people really to believe that there is a reversion back to the way things should be if they ever were that way, and everybody's so high on this, and it turns around, and like I said, takes the votes away from the Republicans and brings Obama, and it's like, well, nice going, guys. That would be, I tell you what, that would be rich. So we'll see how this all unfolds, but I think something stinks. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Andy.
Well, no, I mean, and they would probably want to have a nice provocation right around there to get Obama, to get us into a new one, into a big war.
Well, yeah.
Because the 2012 thing, which is Harriet's birthday, by the way, the end of the Mayan calendar.
Yay! She may not have it. You might want to hold that a little earlier, kid. But go ahead, Andy. Go ahead.
I thought of another template thing where they rework ideas. And I know that during the war, World War II, and of course still today probably, one of the military's techniques for it's basically highway, what was the word for it in the Old West? When you bushwhack somebody, you have a roadblock or some situation where people stop and they don't know what's going on.
Okay.
And I heard a story in Point Pleasant about a guy who, from one of his best friends, basically his best friend told me this. The guy doesn't want his name out there, but he stopped at a roadblock or a wreck in Point Pleasant. There was what looked like a car wreck. He gets out, tries to help, and then he finds himself 4 hours later, whenever, back at home. And he thinks he was abducted by aliens now, because it's happened a couple of times since. And I just have to ask the question, why would aliens have to set up a fake car wreck to abduct someone? So this is an old OSS style or ex-Nazi style ambush, and it fits the whole, you know, I guess model that I'm putting forth about who was doing this stuff. Now, his, one of his friends is another guy who just happens to be the guy who lived in the Mothman house on Woodward Drive. I mentioned this guy a year ago because he showed up at the Mothman Festival and started talking about 1111 and how he was running into that number all the time. And he has now told me that he actually met the entity that Harriet and Tommy and I met, but he kept it secret because he didn't want anybody to know and make fun of him. But it was in the same exact place that we all had our sightings. And he said he was accosted by some I don't know, he didn't say demonic, but it was a scary, invisible kind of entity that grabbed his left shoulder and clamped down on him. And he was still freaking, you know, he was still showing signs of trauma when he told me the story. So I really believe him. And that was an interesting, another interesting thing that happened at the festival. Another one was I met a guy named Steve Underwood who saw a UFO here in Mount Vernon, which is right down the road from us. We're going to go there next. Underwood worked for the Air Force. He was a technician of some kind in the lab. Well, we started talking, and he said he had grown up in South Charleston, which is right across the river from Mound, where I lived. And in '67, he saw a flying creature there, which, you know, sounds like Mothman. So he had two sightings. He had a Mothman and he had one in Mount Vernon, and it made me think of George Washington again, you know, like, why did he have a sighting in Mount Vernon?
Right.
Of all places. Because we've been following this George Washington trail. And there is an obelisk here in the next town called Mount Gilead, a very nice tall obelisk in the center of town. And this is Washington country, where a lot of his former soldiers were given land after they defeated the Indians and so forth. What else?
So this stuff with Washington predates the Revolution. You're talking about the French and Indian War and his participation in it?
Yeah. I mean, he basically wiped out the Indians, his armies. I mean, under his control. They were under the control of sub-commanders, but I think he's the one who probably was responsible for the death of Chief Cornstalk. Ultimately. I mean, somebody else killed Cornstalk, but, you know, Washington was the big commander, I would assume, in 1777. Or was he already, he didn't stop his activities after the 1776, did he?
No, not at all. And I'm also wondering, too, because during the French and Indian War, is this also when he was doing the surveying, you know, that took place out in what was called then the Western Frontier, which is pretty much Western Pennsylvania and beyond. Because that's what we always laugh at. We say that, you know, Washington really was the country's first realtor.
Yep. Another story I heard was from a lady whose grandfather had been a director at the Standard Ultramarine facility. And he was also a CAP pilot. She says that in 1982, she was an international studies major at Marshall, where I went, and we actually were in the same art class. And so we found, you know, she had found me on Facebook or whatever, and we started talking. And she said, you know, that was a Nazi-based company and so forth, that she had gone into international studies, and you know, most of the time those are spies, or I don't know how many international studies majors are spies, but she traveled a lot in that capacity, you know, wanting to know about the world and so forth. She was always kind of a rebel type person, wanted to, you know, find out what was out there. I think it was just, you know, naive, whatever. But she went to certain countries in her travels, which I think got her into trouble. She went to Finland and Russia, and she had a precognition of 911 in 1982. And it's kind of interesting because if somebody was making up a story like this, you'd probably hear some details that sounded believable and concrete, but she's totally, she can't put it together. She can't tell me exactly where she was. She doesn't know exactly what city she was in. She remembers being with some Russians, and then bingo, she saw this vision of the event and seems to have had some missing time there. And I'm thinking, you know, they probably figured she was a spy because she was international studies. They probably saw her visa, saw some stamps on there, and may have, and especially because her family history, they are from the Athens area, and having that history with that company, they were probably being monitored to some degree. So, you know, that's all well and good, but then it gets weirder because right after 911, she started getting, and I think maybe before even, no, she said started about a week after, she started getting all these messages that were from an Islamic, like, terrorist group or something. Like, and she couldn't figure out why she was getting these, but it looked like she was being set up to take some sort of fall. So she just said she turned off the computer and stayed off it for 2 years. And it was so traumatizing because nobody believed her, you know, about the whole 911 thing or whatever was going on. And it basically, you know, broke up her marriage. Maybe, you get the sense that it, you know, may have contributed to that.
Let me ask you, she was getting emails, you said?
Yeah, she was getting emails that were from some Islamic group. That
did it come in the form of somewhat cryptic English syntax?
I will have to ask her that. I don't know. She said it was kind of hard. There was something like, you got the feeling that it was all bizarre kind of messaging and designed to really make her look bad, because that's not the kind of thing you would want on your computer right after 911.
No, well, the reason I bring that up is because that's what Trudeau has been telling me for years, for about 10 years, and that he was getting these kind of like, it was just bizarre language, you know, like phraseologies that we don't use, and he was getting them, and after he would get them, it seemed that within a short period of time, some event would take place, or some event would be stopped from happening. And so I'm just curious, because what you just said to me about that woman, it sounds an awful lot alike what Trudeau was telling me he was getting. And he got it right up until probably this year.
That's freaky.
Well, I would also wonder if other people are getting it as well, and what that's all about. So, yeah, if you get a chance, I'd like to know, because it's got English, but it's just so, like, it's, you know how anybody who would try to write in another language that doesn't have a grasp of it is, you know, I could not write in any other language. But there's just stilted phrases that kind of like jumped out at you, like, okay, that's interesting.
Well, yeah, like they were being sent to people like it was coding, or it was maybe trigger phrases.
Yep, you got it. Exactly. So
I spoke earlier of the full moon. I'm getting back to some tidbits here. Did you know that this super harvest moon rose at 11:09 on the 23rd?
Okay.
9/11 backwards. And I don't know if anything weird. Well, the Vatican thing kind of broke at that time, didn't it? The Vatican scandal, and then there was a Vatican astronomer saying that if he met an alien, he would give him a medal. That to me is coded language saying, you know, again, replace alien with ex-Nazi. You know, it's like the Vatican saying thank you to the Nazis for setting up this global, you know, financial network that they've got going now, where they own all kinds of different things,
and they own the world,
and helping bring the Vatican back to world leadership.
Well, remember also, if you will, which it defies common sense. I don't know who it was in the Vatican who stated, it might have been, supposedly Ratzinger, said that aliens are without sin. Now, how the heck would you know that? You know what I mean? So, in other words, what is he ascribing to aliens? That they have no sin, therefore they are what? Nice people? If they even talk about it, because they're not on the earth, it means that they were spared original sin, which we all supposedly are born in with. I say supposedly in deference to those who aren't Christian. I believe that's true. But for him to turn around and say, okay, yeah, the aliens, they got no original sin. Oh, is that right, Joey? When did you talk to them? How did you find that out? Did God tell you? Yeah, so, I mean, they have done, they do it incrementally, but they've gotten more and more into this UFO thing, and they're more or less giving it an imprimatur, if you will, which would at least release people from some fears about what these creatures or whatever they are. So, yeah, you're right.
Well, the Pope is probably taking his orders from Charlie Manson from prison.
Well, he's taking them from somebody.
That's my new theory. No, just kidding.
All right, that's all right.
But Manson, said in his 1994 interview that there was a Latin American wing to this movement. That's a quote from him. And he was talking about his back to nature movement that he started. Air, trees, water, something else. Atwa. And so that's an indication there, along with some of the other things he said about Nazis, SS guys, baking him in the oven. You start to see, references here to South America and the Nazis. And I think, what if Charlie, he's got maybe he was, contacted by these same men in black with Nazi leanings. Interestingly, he's got a drawing that I'm going to have in Mothman Speaks, Manson, of himself, his head floating in the middle of what looks like an E8 vortex, which we've talked about, this mathematical shape that describes the activities of the different 238 quantum particles that there are. And 4 of those have been identified as having to do with gravity. And I have an image in there where they took the E8 and they isolated those 4, and it forms an X. And they all look like the CBS all-seeing eye, the little dots that they've created for each of the magnetic particles. I don't know why they did that, but it's got it, and that's sort of that's definitely an occult or Masonic emblem.
Well, speaking about that. Well, let me just, now that you've gone there, let me just ask you about this. One of the emails I saved from you had to do with Blackwater changing its name to what, XE?
Yes.
And what is the relationship between, I assume, X and 11s?
Wow. Or X energy. The energy of the X.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, when I was at the Dayton Art Museum, which is right near Wright Pat, they have 2 Zulu pots in there. One has 4 X's on it, made up of 9 dots each. And they have next to it a pot with 4 X-shaped animals that look exactly like Mothman, like the current drawings that you see of a Mothman-like entity. And it's really startling. It's almost like the Zulus are saying this flying creature is embodied in the X, or the X represents the flying creature. And you can see this when you look at the Masonic logo. You've got your downward L shape and your upward L shape. And while those may indeed represent gender, male, female, creation of human life and so forth and various other things, it also looks like XX, and it also looks like a bird flapping its wings. And it also could mean, the sun god. It's a sun god. All these ancient things are sun god worshiping situations, really. And I noticed that the top of the compass is a little O, and then inside the actual intersection, you've got the big G supposedly for God.
Yeah.
But it spells Og. It spells OG, which is the ancient land where the Atlantean queens from Atlantis moved to after it fell and kept the blue lineage of royalty alive. And it connects. It's a connecting point. Og is a connecting point between the Moors and Europe. So I think it symbolizes that movement that they were making. It's an intermediate stop between South and North. And that's essentially what the Masonic emblem is doing. It's got a north and a south to it.
Well, then, does it have a relationship to, I'm sure you're familiar with in the Bible about Gog and Magog?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, Og also relates to Ak. You know, Peter Moon goes into all these variations, but Ak means vision. So it's like the sun gives vision. You know, with light you can see. With light you have shadow, which forms material objects and material reality that we can exist in and experience.
Let me ask you something too. The letter X, this is what I understand, okay? But I'm going to ask you how you came up on this and whether or not you believe this is true or not. But X, as far as having any kind of symbolism beyond its place in the alphabet, X has always been associated with evil. Is that what you've got?
Or the unknown. Go ahead.
Oh no, because there's two motifs that take place. One of them is embraced by Christianity. The other is kind of like, well, they don't promote it, but they allow it. And Albert Pike also touched upon this when he wrote that book, Morals and Dogma, in 1878, when he talked about some of the occult symbols. And in that time when they published the book, you know, it was pretty. I don't know if you've ever seen the book, but the drawings in there are pretty crude. But he laughed because we look at Catholicism and also mainstream Protestantism, and you can see this a lot of times whenever they adorn the churches for whatever time of season it is religiously, with the long stem P and that stem bisected by the letter X. Can you visualize that? Do you remember that from churches?
Oh yeah, that's the Chi Rho symbol, which is the symbol of the Colvin family reaching back to the 1100s. And they were obviously Masons. Well,
what Pike said was that the P is symbolic of the Egyptian Resh, and the X is occult. So when getting back to the two things that Christianity embraces, one is the sun motif, which is a very nasty double entendre. Because, and I'll give you an example, when Lady Viz and I would go to sunrise services for Easter Sunday, we would all gather on the Palisades of New Jersey looking east over Manhattan as the sun came up. So here we were looking to the east, and the sun, S-U-N, came up. What is the sun, S-U-N, got to do with the sun, S-O-N? You know what I mean? It
makes me think of Japan, and they had the black sun emblem on their flags, which none have been found. I mean, they've destroyed them all records. I found one photo of it. Some American GIs recovered one of the black sun flags.
Well,
but the black sun is a big Nazi symbol, you know, and it's the reversal of the sun, you know, meaning void or magnetic energy forming objects, I think.
Well, and here too, I mean, this goes back to Babylon and before it. The sun seems like a positive thing, and it is for most parts. I mean, with regard to life-giving sun as we know it, but it gets intermixed. It's an occult symbol. They've embraced it as such, and it gets intermixed with Christianity, and so therefore, eventually, Lady Viz and I were talking and going, what service are we really going to? I mean, and here's another thing, right? Even though we know that the birth of Christ was manipulated and moved, it's a fixed date as it should be. You were born on such and such a date. Harriet was born on such and such a date, and so was I. So that stays fixed. But then, how in the world can you have a death date float? You, Harriet, and I are going to die on certain dates, and it's not going to move around on the calendar. But Easter does. And if that isn't a tip-off to people that this is a cult and has everything to do with the vernal equinox. Okay? So in other words, when did Christ die? It doesn't float. Okay? So if you catch get where I'm going with that. And then so we go up to these services, and I'm saying, who are we really worshiping? The S-O-N, Jesus, or the S-U-N? And who said that Christ was raised from the dead at sunrise? It's nowhere in Scripture. And of course, you see paintings with auras or halos. That's also from the sun god. So what you were just talking about as we got into with the words X and stuff, how much of Christianity has embraced this sun thing, thinking it's S-O-N, and in essence, it's S-U-N, and the last thing is this, using X to replace Christ in the word Christmas. Satan's got to he's got to be laughing his ass off about that one. Okay.
Yeah, well, I remember talking about this before, and I mentioned that there's I might be a deliberate mix up being created with sun and sun. If Christ was Moorish, which it looks like he definitely was in Egypt, living in Egypt and so forth, or at least they claim it there.
All right.
He would black sun, black S-O-N, and maybe that's something that needs to be obscured, so they bring in another spelling to make it confuse the issue. I don't know.
No, but I mean, that's why I asked you about X.
Well, as I'm speaking right now, I look down at my notes, and there's a rainbow. We're sitting in a car, the light's coming through the window. It's creating a little rainbow effect on the piece of paper in front of me. It's about a half an inch across, and it is falling exactly on the XX Masonic symbol that I was doodling. I took a photo of it, and I'll send it to you.
And Harriet's a witness.
Yeah, she saw it. I've been talking about the name Resh all week because here in Ohio you find a lot of Rush names.
Okay.
And Rush is a derivation. It usually means Native American royalty, and it relates to Roshi, in Japanese, and Maharishi. Every country seems to have Rush or Resh or names that refer to this ancient blue blood lineage thing.
Agreed.
I'm about done. Let's see. One thing I wanted to mention was Ohio stations seem to have been replaced by BP stations all over Ohio. So now, like at this mound site in Belpre where the bridge is, it goes over to Parkersburg, where Mothman was seen. There's a BP station sitting there, and I'm starting to see BP stations everywhere. Whereas before we were talking about marathon stations being at these different spots.
Yeah, you're right.
They're both Standard Oil, basically.
Mm-hmm.
One interesting little tidbit was a mention of Hoagland's work, and I don't subscribe to Hoagland, but he did put out this nice little piece of information that when the moon landing occurred, and you may have heard this, that the first moon landing, it was exactly timed so that I guess Orion's belt had just come up above the horizon on the moon, because a lot of this Apollo stuff has Osiris, or is it? Is that right? The belt, Orion's belt. I'm sorry.
Orion's belt, yeah.
Which represents Isis, Horus, and Osiris.
Right.
Your big three. One of which Horus, seems to be this winged sun. It's a sun god with wings. Interestingly, I took a picture when I was in Washington Courthouse. I took a picture of a vulture that was sitting on the big obelisk there. And Eugenia Macer's story wrote and said, "Well, did you know that the vulture is a key Egyptian symbol?" And to me, it was a sign of sorts that you're on the right track. Washington Courthouse, there's something going on here. More stuff to look at. And oddly, I put that picture next to the picture of the statue in Washington, in Seattle, called the Spirit of Washington, which is an orca whale fin sculpture that has the Flatwoods Monster basically carved into it, or the Virgin Mary, depending on how you want to call it. And it's like a Native American version of an obelisk. But incorporating this entity that people see that can be described as male or female, which Harriet saw in one sitting, on Woodward Drive, she saw one morph into the other. So I think that's a significant clue that Masonry, George Washington, the Indian mounds, the whole story plays a key role in how this all came about, because the Nazis were really into George Washington, as we discussed, when they held their big Congress in 1932. They had George Washington hanging, a huge painting of him hanging instead of Hitler, or instead of the swastika.
Mm-hmm.
So it all comes around to this same group that's tied in with the oil companies and BP and so forth, and Standard Oil. Just messing with people's heads, more or less. And another thing was, I wanted to mention, I don't want to forget it, but mention before I go, because we have to get going here pretty soon, is red mercury. Someone came up and said, have you heard of red mercury? And mercury has long been pointed at as a key substance in the occult, in alchemy, as it's even been ascribed to what you can use to drive a UFO. There's an ancient drawing of a vortex engine, which basically looks like a caduceus, which we talked about as being a symbol of the Garuda. But you can also see that caduceus as a coiled engine that's running on mercury. And I've got a couple of illustrations of that in the new book. And so this person I know who has some intelligence connections tells me about red mercury, that it's being sold by the Russians to people, but no one really knows what it is. It's either a fake out or a scam. The Russians are selling people mercury for this kind of purpose, some kind of occult purpose or anti-gravity purpose, and yet it's not the real stuff, and no one exactly knows what it is the Russians are giving them, but they're not getting what they think they're getting. And apparently there is some NSA activity now regarding Russia, like things might be heating up a bit, but it hasn't come into the public domain yet that is what is happening. But we do have that new Vatican scandal, which may connect up somehow, where they've seized 30 million, and it apparently links right back to you were saying it, and the article actually says it links right back to the 1980s P2 scandal.
Yeah. Yeah, I go ahead.
And there was a couple of items, a couple of the other items you mentioned was the Bush letter that he knew. The guy, who was it that he knew? The founder of Blackwater? Or Kellogg Brown and Root?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you sent that to me, and that comes from whom? That comes from Bruce Campbell? That's where you got it from, or what?
Yeah, Bruce Campbell's always digging up these little letters and things that are, definite proof that Bush was in on the shenanigans there in Texas regarding JFK and different defense contractors and things.
Well, I mean, the language in that letter is obviously vague, and it seems like, what should I say? It's like hinting at stuff, if you know what I mean. Like, for instance, it says, Bush, you may be out of touch with the Cuban problem. Okay, so there you go. That's what I'm talking about, Oh, the Cuban problem, what would that be necessarily?
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's JFK.
Yeah, and I'm just going to pull this up now because I always get kind of mixed up with the dates. There's a couple of things that I find interesting. Oh, the Bay of Pigs was when? April 61. I believe that's correct. Hold on a second. Yeah, it was April 61. And then about 10 days after the failed Bay of Pigs adventure, that's when Kennedy talks to the New York Press Club, and in his speech, he has a very interesting section that talks about, because we are confronted on all sides by a what was it, a monolithic conspiracy. Do you remember that?
Yeah. He was calling out the Vatican and the Nazis, ex-Nazis.
Well, we don't know. He didn't mention it, but the thing is, figure it out. Obviously, he was talking about a nation. He would have said such because obviously, we all looked at Cuba and the Russians as being the boogeyman. So he would have nailed them if that were the case. He wasn't trying to be coy about Russia. In fact, I'm calling it up now. If you just give me a second. I know you guys got to go. But
what was the other story the third one?
All right, the third one. Let me take a look. Let's see. No, well, the other one had something to do with because you were just talking about September 23rd as being unique, but you sent me an email about June 23rd. Do you remember that? That according to Keel was the most paranormal day of the year.
Yes. Something happened on that day, which I'm sure I've got in the book, but I can't remember what it was now.
Well, I don't know who this exchange took place with, but it was interesting. So on June 23rd, within 3 hours of my getting an email from a witness claiming that the men in black in your 1969 photo had been coming around her house in association with Indra Cole, thus validating your photograph as authentic and extremely important, Tim Beckley sent out an article about how this photo is the only real one of an MIB, man in black. Does that shake anything for you?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that was just a weird synchronicity, and I don't think Beckley's reading my mail, but it just was an odd thing. Like, how did he know? How did he know that I was? Oh, maybe he just saw it somehow. Maybe he saw the blog, or well, I think I'm trying to remember if I blogged about that.
All right.
I think I may have, but no, actually, I don't think I had blogged about it by then, and I think maybe it was just a weird thing. And the other thing is that Beckley was going to write an intro for the Men in Black Secret Terror Among Us book that I'm reprinting, but he said that he had lost the intro after he'd written it, and he was going to write another one or something, but then I never heard from him again, and then within a few months he came out with his own Men in Black book that just came out.
All right, let me just tie this up real quick. The Bay of Pigs was on April 17th. All right, and of course it was definitely sabotaged. I think Kennedy knew it was going to happen. I mean, there's a lot of going back and forth on this, but I think Kennedy knew it. He wanted it to happen, and it was scuttled. And that's what I think pissed him off about the CIA, not the fact that they did it without his knowing it. That would never have failed. And I don't want to go into the whole details about it, but the reason they give for the failing of the Bay of Pigs is absolutely vapid. I mean, it's just ridiculous. What they said was it was a mix-up in the time zone, since the planes came out of Happy Valley in Nicaragua in the central time zone, and they came in an hour too late because they didn't know what time zone they were dealing with. The military always, not sometimes, not once in a while, always uses Zulu time, which is also Grand Meridian time, so that those things with time zone problems don't happen. So that was completely bullshit. So that means then that this thing was scuttled. So anyway, then the 17th, the Bay of Pigs fail. 10 days later, on April 27th, he speaks to Kennedy does, to the New York Press Club, and then he goes into that famous thing about, for we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence. And it goes on and on and on, and says it doesn't necessarily, it says it's a system which has conscripted vast human and materials resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. And then you get this letter that Campbell came across to Bush on October 5th, 1961. So this is a number of months after the Bay of Pigs fails, and obviously 13 months before Kennedy's killed. So that's why I took a look at this. I thought it was very interesting. Just some more insight. But for Kennedy to talk the way he did in that speech and not mention a country, I think that's pretty clear that he knows that he got waylaid by, shall we say, the Nazi/Rome CIA which took over the OSS, which my uncle was in. And just really quick, Andy, I think I might have told you this before. I wrote about this. I'm not writing a book. I don't want to be pompous and say that, but I'm writing a chronicle of why and how I came to where I came. And one of the things was my uncle was in the OSS, and when he would get loaded on Christmas, and we all would go up to see the uncle, he said to me what we did was treasonous. He was an OSS officer. He did not make the jump to the CIA. He went into private security. But I remember at these meetings when he would get duly lubed, he would say what we did was treasonous. And I've always wondered what that meant. I never asked my parents. My sister can't remember because she was there too, 8 years older than I. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, you got an OSS, huh?
A lot of these OSS guys, were hooked in with, helping the Nazis get out and get restarted.
And if I were a betting man, I'd bet the keys to the camper on the fact that that's what he saw happen. He was seeing the OSS being transformed into the CIA by former SS, and he knew that the OSS abetted Operation Paperclip, where Nazis were being spirited out of Europe with the help of the Vatican into the Western Hemisphere, not only the United States, but South America as well. So, yeah, absolutely. All right, bro.
Thanks.
Thank you. It's good to talk to you again, and also good to hear from Harriet. Yeah, really good to hear from you, Harriet. It's been a while, and I'm glad to talk to you, and I hope you're feeling well.
Doing great.
All right. That means it can only go downhill. Don't worry about it. Also, Andy, you are out in Ohio and in the old hood an awful lot. Is this a precursor to the fact you might think about moving back east? And I know you have extenuating circumstances, but are you thinking about that at all?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to get a farm here. One of these rolling hill farms they have around Ohio. There's a lot of them.
Well, I'll tell you what. In my retirement now, I'm cheap and I work fast and I'm good. So if you want to, I'll come out and help you out. Otherwise, I'm going to wind up in Washington State after you leave to go to Ohio. So.
Yeah, well, I'd shoot for Ohio. There's a lot more services here than Eastern Washington.
Oh, I would say so.
As we get older, we might need to go down to the Walmart.
Not that. No, not that. And get our blood pressure checked. Yeah, right. Okay. All right, listen, good to talk to you. And when you head back home again, give me a buzz. And I know Robert Dent would like to get on with you sometime, if you don't mind. And Adam as well, Adam Gorightly. So thanks a lot. Have a really safe trip. And I'll look forward to talking to you guys again.
Thanks, Biz. Appreciate it.
Now, I hope you've put in a lot of time practicing the sounds as I taught them to you on this record. If you have, then you can do the simple alphabet for me without moving your lips. Danny, come on, let's hear it. Come on, let's hear it. Come on, let's hear it. Come on, let's hear it.
What? Oh, the simple alphabet, the first thing you gave us. Yeah, that's easy. Let's see.
Don't forget to position your mouth.
Okay, teeth together. Teeth together.
Position your mouth.
Okay, teeth together. Great. Teeth together.
Teeth together. Teeth together.
Lips parted slightly. Mouth relaxed. Tongue loose in the mouth. Right.
Now let's hear the simple alphabet.
Here it comes. C, D, E, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, O,
Q, R, S, T, U, X, Z. Yes. Three. Yes. Set. Ui. Set. Raw. Ui. Four. Night. What? Yes. Yes. Ah. Shit. Yes. 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 Okay.
I could teach just about anybody.
That's a heck of a way to start this record now. Besides ventriloquism for the beginner.